My name is Monk Rowe, and we are filming for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive in San Diego, California, and I am very, very pleased to have Johnny Best, big band trumpeter and notable musician throughout many, many years of American music. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
As I told you before the cameras were rolling, I have this idea that the big band days, that the swing era was a great time to be a young man. Was that a fair statement?
Well, people seem to be pretty happy then.
Yeah.
With that kind of music.
What was it about that music that made it so popular?
That's a hard one.
Was it the...
Well, basically, it was a dance. It was dance music, and of course, the country was full of ballrooms in those days, and people liked to dance, ballroom dance, and I think that was between the ballrooms and the theaters. That was what they liked.
When you were a young man, let's say a boy, what attracted you to the trumpet?
I'm not sure. Oh, I'll tell you how it started.
Sure.
And it goes back to 1926. My brother brought a cornet home from the public schools, and I picked it up one day, and it had a little book with the fingering on it, and I could play My Country 'Tis of Thee, and well, it wound up that I took the cornet. The music professor needed a trombone player. He switched my brother to trombone, and that's how I started with the cornet from the school cornet. And then probably about 4 or 5 months later, the music man, the bandmaster, suggested to my dad that that he buy me a good trumpet because I had improved enough to. So he did. He bought me a silver-plated Buescher trumpet for $52.
52.
In 1927. Gold-plated bell, and that's how I started, and stuck with the trumpet.
You played in the school band and learned to read music from that.
Yeah. Well, when I was 6 years old, my mother had me take piano lessons, and I don't know whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, but the older boys are the same. They made fun of me for I was the only boy in the small town that played piano, and they said nobody but sissies and girls played piano. So that was the end of my piano, and I regretted that some years later.
Yeah, piano can be a great thing to know,
gives you
even
chords and all that stuff.
Can you recall the first recordings you heard in the jazz field that made you take some notice? Well,
in this band later on, well, say 1927, 28, we didn't have a radio in the house, in our house until 1928. So about 4 houses up the street, the saxophone player that played in the band, he was 3 years older than me. I would go up there and listen to the radio, and he had some recordings of Coon Sanders, and the radio, we just pick out, well, that band was also on the radio, WGN Chicago, and
they would play the music of the day, which was jazz.
I can't remember but Paul Whiteman in 1928 did a concert in Charlotte, which is about 50 miles away, and I went over to that concert, and Bix Beiderbecke was in the band. It was Frankie Trumbar and Bing Crosby and Henry Bussey, and Henry Bussey made a more impression than Bix did
No kidding.
at that time.
Did he have maybe a bigger sound or something?
Well, I don't, maybe just a better salesman.
Yeah, sure.
But I think I was 15 years old then. But when I went off to college, after the first year of college, I went in a band, an organized band, and led by a woman, Elga Burns. And we had a trombone player in that band that brought in some arrangements that Red Nichols had played, and he was a Miff Mole fan. And so I learned a few things. In fact, in that summer, he came in with whatever the magazine was about music and entertainment. It said Bix Beiderbecke had died. Showed me the article, and I said, of course, I said, Bix who? You know, he said, the greatest trumpet player that ever lived. You know, so that became. I went out and bought some Beiderbecke records that he was on. I didn't buy the original stuff, which I should have, but you know, I bought some Whiteman records that Beiderbecke had played some.
Uh-huh. He's looked on as almost a legend now, Bix.
Yeah.
And so, was he really popular in the 20s also? But you hadn't heard of him really until he died. Is that right?
Right. But I had heard him play and didn't know it. But I was impressed with a record that he made of. He played some background on the Paul Whiteman record of "Melancholy Baby" that Jack Fulton sang. Mm-hmm. And that's why first time I heard him play, and I was very impressed by the little thing he did behind the vocal, not realizing that those were the two that I saw at that concert. I didn't know the names. Mm-hmm.
Did your parents, were they supportive of your interest in music as you grew up? Or did they want you to be something else?
My mother wanted me to be a preacher. I think my dad, whatever I did, I was his favorite.
Yeah.
But the way it turned out, it just kept working. I never studied music, you know. Mm-hmm. I always regretted that, but I didn't want. I like to play, and I like to. Just like songs, you know. And it kept going. Never made any money. If we did make it, the leader would go off with it.
No.
In those days.
Yeah.
I remember we did a whole bunch of college stuff around Christmas holidays in North Carolina and Virginia. And this guy took all the money. Next time we saw him, he's smoking an expensive cigar and has a beautiful suit of clothes.
And you paid for it.
We paid for it.
Yeah. What band was that? Was that one of the early groups?
That was a band that originated at the University of North Carolina. Mm-hmm. That's where I went after my freshman year in college at Davidson. I transferred there, and because they had much bigger school there, they also had a music school, which I didn't go to. But they had campus bands, like that's where Hal Kemp started, and that's also where Kay Kaiser came from. And there was more opportunity to play than I was. By this time, I really wanted to play. And on the campus, when I transferred there as a sophomore, there was a trumpet. The band there was Carolina Tar Heels, they call them. And they had a trumpet player, Bix Ramsey. So I asked him, I said, why do they call you Bix? You know, he said, because I play so much like Bix. He was kind of I won't say dumb, but he was a good player.
Yeah.
And funny. He wrote out some stuff that Bix played, you know, and I, note for note, and I finally played in that band with him, and we dropped out of school several times, and anyway, that's how it just kept going like that.
Did you kind of give up college to go out and pursue your music?
I gave up college for 3 years, went out with bands, and then I went back to college for another, well, I guess a full year. And by that time, I never did go back to get a degree because I had music jobs that I wanted to keep playing, and
Right.
went from unknown bands to I wound up with some fellow had a band in 1936. Well, I don't know whether you would know about Hank Biagini. Well, Hank Biagini was from Detroit, and he had the original Casaloma band, which was actually it was Gene Goldcat. That name?
Sure.
Well, Goldcat had a band called the Orange Blossoms, and Biagini took over that band and played cornet, not a jazz man. That band eventually became the Casaloma band, which was under Glenn Gray, about 1931 or 32. And I wound up in New York, and some band broke up, and went out of New York with the Biagini band. He was playing one of the ballrooms, Aragon, I think, or that sounds like Chicago, but in New York. I went out with that band, $25 a week, 1932 or 3. 33, But we made it, you know.
Did that, if you got $25 a week, did you have to pay for your own rooms?
Food.
Your own food?
Yeah. Milk was 8 cents a quart.
Did you send any money?
A dime was a tip. If you went out with your girl, 25 cents was a good tip.
Wow.
They had Horn and Hardart, the restaurants where nickels and quarters were the biggest thing, and they had excellent quality food in New York.
You put a thing in the machine?
Yeah, a slot. You get a meal for 35 cents.
Wow. So you could live on $25 a week if you were a young man. Yeah, you did, obviously.
I got a raise up to $40. I thought I was in...
Yeah. And when you guys went out to travel, did you mostly take 2 or 3 cars, or was it on a bus or train?
Cars, big cars. In those days, I remember with Biagini, we left, I think it was Erie, Pennsylvania, cold. I went to Binghamton. That's when I got out of the car, we checked in the hotel, and I saw this thermometer on the wall, 28 below zero. And I was dumb enough just to walk out and go to the restaurant. Your ears could have dropped off, I think.
Your trumpet could stick to your mouth at those temperatures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also had just the opposite of that once in Guadalcanal, where you had to shade the mouthpiece from the sun.
Oh,
I was doing the Navy.
Yeah. Now, we're going to get to that. Remind me, I'll ask you about that. Les Brown, Charlie Barnett, were these the first, let's say, name groups?
Well, go back to 1932. I had dropped out of school, and North Carolina University was on a quarter system instead of the semester. I dropped out after the second quarter, and around Greensboro, just played with bands. And I think it was in May of that year, I got a call from the leader of the Duke University Blue Devils band. They had 2 bands on the campus there. And it was not, this before Les. Want to know if I would do a summer job with them in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which I did. I took a job. And that band, after the summer job, was booked by MCA for 3 weeks in New England under the Shribman brothers playing ballrooms. Nick Laney, a star football player at Duke, was the leader. We got to Boston, and there was a band there from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and Les Brown was in that band. They heard him play and talked Les into going to, he had just finished high school, and into going to Duke that fall, which he did. And I also enrolled at Duke that fall, and I stayed there 6 weeks and left again. So that's. But Les graduated from Duke 4 years later. In the meantime, I went back to Chapel Hill. It was 10 miles away at the University of the campus. And I was playing with Les's band and also a campus band. And that was the end of my schooling after that. Wound up with going to Chicago in 1936 with some fellows that I had met with the Biagini band in Savannah, Georgia. Tybee Beach, Hank Biagini had a band down there. And I came down to join the band, but I had laid off for 3 weeks and I had no endurance. So I didn't get the job. It didn't make any difference, you know, as far as, because I just had laid off 3 weeks. But I met all those guys, and this is a band that I got, they were the nucleus of a band that was organized in Chicago that fall. That would be 1936. And this guy was from Wheeling, Pennsylvania, and he wound up as a radio announcer. Hugh McPherson was his name. And he organized this band, and it was a pretty good band. It was reviewed. We played the Meadowbrook, Frank Daly's Meadowbrook. I got an honorable mention write-up by Mr. George Simon, and Glenn Miller was with George Simon. They came in there, and that's the first time I met Glenn. I had heard him before, seen him before. But they heard me play, and it was favorable mention, you know, so.
Your first time in print?
What?
Your first time that your name showed up in print as far as a music magazine?
With Glenn.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that band broke up at the end of 36. So I decided I'd try to get a New York card. You have to sit out 6 months' time with residence. You're eligible to work after 3 months, certain type of work. So you got to sweat it out, you know. Well, I was sweating it out for 3 months, and I got a knock on the door, and the trumpet player that I had played with would be Jenny, Savannah, you know, and also in the McPherson band. He had Artie Shaw with him. Well, I didn't, you know, I had heard of Artie Shaw. In fact, I had a record that I had bought, Artie Shaw, with strings on it. And Peg LaCentre sang the vocal on it. And a song called I'll Remember, I think it was. But and Artie said he was organizing a new band. He had had string bands and lost a lot of money on it because people just wouldn't go for it. He was going to organize a band with the same instrumentation as Benny Goodman. So, and he had an opening for another trumpet. So I said, well, maybe I shouldn't say all this. So
please.
Artie might listen.
Please do.
Anyway, I'll go ahead with it.
Yeah.
He said, I said, Artie, I've been here 3 months, you know, starving, and I don't want to lose the 3 month time. He said, I'm a personal friend of Jacob, I don't remember his name, the president of the New York Local. He said, I'll see that your time goes on.
Because if you left New York, then you'd lose your 3 months?
Right.
Is that the idea?
If they pull that card out, the union card out, your transfer card. So I said, well, that's fine, you know. Well, I'll make that short. At the end of the 6 months, I asked the manager for my card. He pulled it out. He said, withdrawn March the 31st. So that kind of upset me, you know, a little bit. And there was a while there that I was pretty angry at Mr. Shaw. And in September of that year, I left Artie and went back to North Carolina. I didn't have any job, but
So you never, at that point, got into the New York local?
no.
Because they just pulled your card and
Yeah.
you had to start all over?
Well, in a way, I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah.
You know, because the way it turned out, it was good.
Yeah.
And you get mad, but I got mad at Artie, and he had a recording date, and this was in the 1937 band, September, and I'd been in that band too. But after the union card thing, I was, not too friendly. So he had one of those transcription dates in New York, like we were playing at WWII, New Jersey, a summer resort, and this was September, I guess, at the end of the summer year. And there was a new tune out. I can't remember the name of it. And my part had the release on the tune. So I played it, and the saxophone player, good friend, Freddie Petrie, he turned around, gave me the, encouraged. He said, I got through, sat down at the end of the thing. Shaw said, John, is that the best you can play that? I said, Artie, at that time, that was my best attempt. He says, I'll play that tomorrow on the recording. And I said, well, as of right now, Artie, you can play every other solo I have in the book. And that kind of shook him my luck. He said, what does that mean? I said, 2 weeks or tonight, either way you want it. I'll leave tonight, and I did leave in 2 weeks. I went back to North Carolina, 8 months, worked in a furniture store and did local, playing around Charlotte, Spartanburg, and college, a couple of college things. 8 months, and Artie had told me, and some of those guys, that I didn't hear enough of the early Louis Armstrongs, which I didn't. And meantime, I had bought a lot of those records and listened to them, and I finally realized what they were talking about, like Wild Man Blues and all those old things. So I wrote Artie a letter somewhere in that time. He called me up and said, you want to come back in the band? So I did. I went back to join him in Boston, to Roseland Square Ballroom, I think. Billie Holiday was in the band. And I stayed in that band until I joined the Glenn Miller Band.
You did some traveling.
3 years more.
You did some traveling in the South with Artie Shaw when Billie Holiday was in the band, didn't you?
Yeah, not much. There was one incident that Billy used to ride in my car. Zudi Singleton also, who traveled with the band for a while in the summer of 1938. And we were in Ohio or someplace, but we went into West Virginia. And Zudi knew the area, Parkersburg, West Virginia. I'd never been. He told me where to stop, and it was a nice-looking building, a 3-story building. And it was a hotel, but it was for black people,
Yeah.
And he got out, and he said, Billy, you better get out. And she said, no, so I'm going down with the rest of the guys. He said, you'll be sorry. You're down south. And she muttered a few words, and anyway, we went on down to the hotel, and they said, we're all full, to her, So she got back in the car, took her back to the hotel, and that was one incident. But there are others that, even in New England.
No kidding.
Of all places, yeah. There was some cracks made when she walked into a dining room.
Did they have to, did she have to come in through the kitchen door? It's sometimes that kind of thing.
That was, that part, you're talking about the Lincoln Hotel in New York.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where the bandstand at the Lincoln Hotel was facing the audience and the ballroom floor. To the right was the door to the kitchen at the other end of the bandstand. And all the tables and stuff were out in front. and the other entrance way over. That was the Lincoln Hotel. And we had to come through the kitchen to get, otherwise you're walking right down to the,
Yeah.
and we were used to that. And I don't know exactly what happened there, but
Right. I wanted to ask you about something.
maybe it was because of Helen did not come through the kitchen. Helen Forrest.
Oh.
She was in the band with Billy. I think that would be the right there that what that
Right.
was.
Okay. I wanted to ask you something about, you were talking about listening to Louis Armstrong, and that you considered those records to be older stuff that you had to go back and listen to, but this was late 1930s you were talking about, right? And Louis had recorded those records only about 10 years before that.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Right.
So really wasn't that big a space between the time when you had to go back and listen to him? It was only 10 years, is that right?
Right.
So really kind of wasn't that old.
Yeah. Well, what kind of burned those guys up a little bit, the ones that were talking about the old Louis, my favorite trumpet player by that time was Bunny Berrigan. He was my idol.
Yeah.
You know, and when I heard Bunny, I just said, well, that's it. But Bunny's favorite was Louis, you know.
Yeah.
And that's what they told me. So what do you think he learned to play from, you know? So you learn a little bit at a time.
Well, you were getting your Louis through Bunny then,
Yeah.
right?
But I liked the Beiderbecke too, but Louis always, when I listen to those old records, yeah, it's just amazing. And also Jack Teagarden. Probably, you know, if of all the musicians that I, ever listened to, of course, Louis and Jack Teagarden would probably be the top of my list. Those guys.
Did you become known as a lead player or the hot man or somewhere in between?
Well, I guess one of the compliments that I ever had said during the war when they were drafting people, they said, well, I could, if you had to get down to one guy, I would be the one, because I could do a little bit of each. So I never had a real strong, high notes.
But you could...
Until after all the bands were through, and then I had my own group. Then I could play.
Yeah.
Sounds. But there was always somebody in that band that wanted to outdo you.
Oh.
4 trumpets.
Yeah.
Wanted to blow you off the stand.
Well, tell me how your years with Glenn Miller came about.
I'm sorry?
Tell me how you got started with Glenn Miller. Was it 1939?
Yeah. Well, I left the Shaw band in August 1939. There was something personal going on that I'd rather not talk about. But I was looking for a job. In other words, I got my notice from Shaw. I'm not afraid to say it, but it didn't have anything to do with, well, I can't even say that.
It wasn't a musical thing, yeah.
Well, he did suggest that I get a smaller bore horn. He thought my tone didn't blend with Chuck Peterson and Bernie Privin. But there was more to this than I can talk about.
Okay.
Involving another sex.
Let's see.
Okay. I hope you can...
Sure. We can read between the lines on that.
Anyway, I was looking for a job, and we were at the hotel in Boston. I can't remember now. Some plaza in Boston. So I came to New York on a day off. I talked to George Simon, I guess. And I had called Benny Goodman and also Tommy Dorsey. No, I'm getting mixed up there with at the end of the Miller thing. I'm sorry, that's not right. But I did, Simon said Glen Island Casino was on the route between Boston and New York, and I was driving. So on the way back to Boston, Simon recommended I talk to Glenn Miller. So I did, and that's where he hired me. Yeah.
Good
he just had 3 trumpets. And
Good timing, huh?
Yeah. And I was the added trumpet boy. He had offered me a job about a year before that.
Oh.
And so I joined the band, and Washington, D.C., at the Capitol Theater.
Now, if in that year, it was 1939, is that right?
Yeah.
If there were 4 top bands in the country, especially considered the musicians considered the 4 top bands, who would they have been in 1939? The 4 top bands.
At that time?
Yeah.
Who were they?
Who was the really hot bands at that time?
At 39?
In 1939.
Well, that's when Miller actually came to the top.
Yeah.
Shaw was still a hot band.
Mm-hmm.
Benny had, I guess, had dropped some. I mean, of the swing band.
Right.
And of course, you have Basie and Ellington. They were always.
Yeah, always there. So when you got hired onto Glenn Miller, what kind of salary did he offer you?
Well, it was a minimum thing, I guess. I think it was $150 a week. I think.
Was that a salary, so no matter how many nights you played, you got the same amount of money?
Well, there's a union scale for every job, you play. There's a road scale for theaters. In those days, $72 a week. You could play 100 shows a week and you'd get $72. It wasn't good.
Yeah.
If you were a star, of course, you could demand your salary. But the Miller Band never really had any salary like Benny. Benny paid Harry James $500 a week when I was making $40 a week or something.
Mm-hmm.
And Ziggy Elman, those guys, and Krupa.
Yeah.
But they was, making. Miller was in debt when he first started, his success, and paid that off. Actually, Shribman Brothers had a contract with Miller for 33.33%.
Wow.
And I can remember Cy Shribman when Miller made his, was up. Shribman told Glenn, he said, "That's a lot of money, isn't it, Glenn?" He had a growly voice. He said, "Well, I'm gonna let you out of that," and he did. He let him off the hook.
That was
it certainly was
pretty gentlemanly of him.
Yeah.
And that name comes up a lot.
Cy Shribman.
Yeah.
Well, Cy and Charlie, and then they had another. I can't think of his name. A nephew. Handled one of their big singers. I can't remember now, but another Shribman out of Boston. Well, they booked the Blue Devils.
Oh.
They were the ones that booked when I was, when we picked up Les Brown in Boston.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Can you recall some of the Glenn Miller tunes that when you first played them, the arrangements were first brought in, that the guys in the band were thinking, this is going to be a hot number? Were there any particular tunes that stood out?
After I joined them?
Yes.
Well, I can remember there was an arranger that brought tunes around after hour. You know, when bands used to rehearse after like 2 o'clock in the morning, you would have a rehearsal after the crowd, you know, over and so on. He brought around an arrangement of Tuxedo Junction. And they worked on that, you know, and I think that turned out to be a tremendous hit.
Mm-hmm. Who was the man who played the muted trumpet part in that song?
Mickey McMickle, Dale McMickle.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And Clyde Hurley played the open solo.
Uh-huh. That was a Erskine Hawkins thing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did he write the arrangement, or was it just his tune?
Well, this arrangement, Erskine Hawkins played a different line. His was more or less like a 32-bar tune, which is a standard with a release. This was not quite like that, you know, but it turned out to be a lot of repeats, you know.
Yeah. Right. Did the Glenn Miller and all those conductors had to really think about what kind of tempos were going to be good for the dancers? Is that right?
Say that?
They had to think about the people dancing to their music when they figured out how fast they wanted to play it.
That I don't. Shaw was more sensitive, I believe, like that. He never played anything really up tempo, except for a show reason, you know.
Uh-huh.
I think the vocals, the lyrics would have to do with the tempo more.
Oh,
than,
that's true. Yeah. Well, what happened to you during the war years? What was your experience
mine
during World War II?
Well, I survived, for one thing.
Yeah.
I didn't want to get drafted. After the Miller Band broke up in September of 42 in Passaic, New Jersey, I joined the Bob Crosby Band. And that lasted 6 weeks, and that band broke up. And that time, in the meantime, during that period, I got a call from Artie Shaw that he was recruiting a band of professional musicians for the Navy. And their job would be to play for the troops, the military, as close to the action of the war as they would send us.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me who was in the band. He said Davy Tuff, Max Kaminsky, Claude Thornhill, and Sam Donahue. And it sounded like a good group, you know, which it was. And meantime, Miller had said he got a commission to go in the Army. He got a captain's commission. And he had also said, don't do anything military until you get in touch with me. He said, I am going to get an organization, a band in the military, or I am going to resign my commission. He was over age for this.
Oh, I see.
Well, and then I also had another thing from a band, a Navy band, that said they would hold a place for me in Norfolk, Virginia. That was Saxy Dowell. I don't know whether that name rings a bell. He was a saxophone player with Hal Kemp for years.
Okay.
And he had in charge of this Navy band at Norfolk. And Dean Kincaid, a saxophone player, was in that band, a good friend. Well, they came to New York one summer, the summer of 42, and they said they would hold a position for me till I made up my mind. So I actually had 3 ways. I didn't want to get drafted. There you have no choice. I had the attitude that if I could survive the war and still be able to make a living playing the horn, that's what I wanted to do. But if you go in, I knew people that good trumpet player that he drove a tank. He never played the horn again the rest of his life. You know, so. Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to get with that band and stay. Shaw was discharged. They threatened to break the band up then, send us out as replacements. But somebody in Washington said, keep the group together, you got an excellent group. And so that Sam Donahue was the leader. And they sent us to England for a year, and that's where we had a battle of music with Glenn's Army Band.
Oh, no kidding.
On the Londonderry Club in London.
Did you have a
Queensbury Club, I said London.
Yeah.
Queensbury.
When you had a battle, each band played like a half hour or something, and the audience decided who they liked the best.
Set. I have a picture of it. The Miller Band, had 21 strings in it, and it was. And our band, at this stage, he had an excellent band. I mean, musically, you couldn't. It'd be. I mean, I still hear tapes of that Army Band, and it was musically it was ahead of his. Well, he had more choice. He had for selection. Where did we leave off?
We were talking about the battle between Artie Shaw and Glenn Miller.
Well, that was Sam
England.
Donahue now.
Oh, Sam Donahue. Okay.
After Shaw was discharged after a year in the
Right.
Pacific, and they threatened to break that band up, send us out as replacement. Now, the other band that I had a choice of going with, they wound up on the Franklin carrier, which was blown off out of the map. It survived the bombing, but they had 1,100 casualties or stuff like that. And I don't know about the band. I know Kincaid survived. I know that. And so did Lita.
So that turned out to be a pretty important decision you had made at that point.
Well, you can't,
You can't look ahead and see that coming.
Lucky.
Yeah. Did you get into Europe with the Donahue
England
band?
Was for that band. After, I got into Europe with Ray Conniff band, and also South America and.
Well, the swing era. I wanted to backtrack just a minute. When you joined Glenn Miller in '39, can you recall who else was in that band at that time?
1939.
Yeah.
The trumpets.
Yeah.
McMichael, Clyde Hurley, and Lee Knowles. Lee was the head of Beaulieu Vineyards, fine wine place. He died within the last year.
No kidding. And was Tex Beneke?
Tex was in the band. Al Clank, Willie Schwartz, Hal McIntyre. The drummer was Maurice Pirtle. Bass player was Raleigh Bundock. He was replaced by Trigger Alpert.
Trigger Alpert, yeah.
Who was replaced by Goldberg. Some of those guys were drafted. That's why they were replaced.
What kind of man was Glenn Miller to work for?
Depends on who you ask.
Yeah, well, I'm asking you.
Well, he was a friend of mine.
Yeah.
We got along.
Okay.
A lot of people did not like Glenn. But they had other reasons, and I had no reason. It was a job. I got mad at him a few times. And he was a tough loser. And if you got him in a crap game, he was he should. And he took it hard, to lose things.
No kidding.
And I don't know how much I should say about the things like this. I really don't.
Well, I don't think it's going to harm any.
He was. You
can
edit this out.
Sure.
Okay. He, toward the end of the whole thing, the war, was breaking up. Harry James' popularity picked up, considerably. It started off, they have the downbeat pole and the metronome pole. So every year it might change, and one guy will come up, like Benny Goodman was the big guy until Artie came up, went over the top. Artie was okay, and then Glenn took over the top. And each time they do that, the leader, you know, it affects them a little bit. So here we are with Glenn, and now Harry James is coming up. And actually Harry took over the Chesterfield broadcast at that time, and of course Harry was tops probably all during the war, I guess, you know, as far as that type of band.
But Glenn didn't like to be in second place, is that right?
Well, it's kind of a blow, I guess. It's
Yeah.
like,
What kind of things would have got you fired from the Glenn Miller Band?
what kind?
What kind of things would he have just said, "You're gone, you're out of here"?
I don't know.
I mean, if you showed up a half hour late,
I see. Yeah, well,
For-
yeah, that would be a no-no.
yeah,
Also, your dress, your clothing, and your appearance, and of course your drinking or whatever.
Yeah.
One thing, of course, was marijuana. He'd fire a guy for that if it was known. Whiskey, you just had to hold it. You know, I don't think. I don't remember seeing Glenn drink. You know, and he had some heavy drinkers. But I don't. Unless they just couldn't do their job, they never got fired.
When you'd go to do a recording session with Glenn or even Artie Shaw, how much time did you usually have in the studio to do a side?
A normal
or,
session was 3 hours. After that, it's overtime. $10 an hour.
And how many tunes would you usually get done in 3 hours?
As many as they could.
As many as you could.
I think there was eventually a limit on that, but I wouldn't. It's been changes made.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you could do like 2 or 3 million selling records and get $10. Your part.
Oh, yeah, because you
as a side.
didn't get any residual or any of that kind of thing.
They do today, but it's a little late for me.
Right. Tell me about was it Bobby Hackett that played that trumpet solo on
what?
On I think it was a String of Pearls?
Yeah.
Yeah. You were on that record.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did he just improvise that on the spot?
Yes.
It sounds like it's such a nice solo. It almost sounds like someone sat down and wrote it out.
Glenn, it was a Billy May solo with a plunger, and it didn't seem to fit the background. The trombones have a little background.
Right.
So Glenn said, "Hey, Bobby's playing guitar." He said, "You think you could fill in on that band?" He did, and that's what came out.
That's
Bobby
great.
was a beautiful player, just great, and he knew chords. And of course, he was a guitar player, but he had excellent taste to me. I mean, he belongs in the tea garden class. He couldn't play the horn like Berrigan, but what he did was just beautiful player. Okay.
Now it's interesting because if you buy the Glenn Miller arrangement of that song, they have his solo
Written out.
Yeah. It's like, it's so perfect you have to do it. Yeah.
I had to play it a lot of times with the.
Sure.
Well, like I worked with Tex quite a bit, and the Modern Airs went out together as a thing, and that was. But most people, they don't play it note for note. Unless you're on a stage or something, you know, then they will play it.
Right.
But if you're on a dance job, they don't.
Yeah. Okay, so after World War II, did you stay on the East Coast, or did you eventually move out?
I joined Benny Goodman immediately.
Oh.
I got out the 9th of October, what year was it?
44, was it?
45.
45?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I went back to North Carolina to see my mother for a couple of days or something. But I had the job with Benny, I think the 15th or something like that. And I was with Benny until he broke up the band in 14 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very happy to join that band
Yeah.
after 3 years in the Navy. Because 4 of us went out of that band. The band wasn't, we were not all, you discharged, the married guys got out first, you know, they had more points. So they didn't know it, but I was divorced at about that same time.
Uh-huh.
If they'd have found out, I'd probably still be in the Navy.
Oh, no kidding. You said something about points? You had to have a certain number of points?
To get out.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you were married...
Overseas counted more than home.
I see.
So we were overseas 2 out of the 3 years we were out of the country. You got a little more money,
Mm-hmm.
$16 a month or something
Wow.
for travel time.
Yeah. Well, when you joined Goodman, Gene Krupa was probably gone by then.
Maurice, oh no, now I can't. He died. Maury Feld.
Oh,
was
Maury
it called?
Feld.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Gazzo. Well, 4 I was joining was the bass player, Barney Kessel. I mean, not Barney Kessel. Barney Spieler was our bass player,
Uh-huh.
who later on he got killed in an auto accident in Holland. He had moved to Holland and was playing in the symphony there, and he was killed. I was the bass player in the Navy band. Now I'm
We were talking about the Goodman trumpet section. And
Gazzo and I joined, Benny, the trumpet section was Gazzo, Fazzo, Mucci, and Best. And Benny said, Gazzo, Fazzo, Mucho, and Bazzo. I was going to be...
you had to have a vowel at the end of your name to fit with everybody else, right?
But that changed pretty fast.
Yeah.
Benny went through a lot of different players.
Mm-hmm.
In the 14 months. And then
Yeah.
that band broke up in New York at the 400 Club. Business, you know, just went through the... He took the band off the road. Benny had a guarantee of $3,000 a night compared to Harry's guarantee. That's for a dance.
Mm-hmm.
And people stopped going to dances. So Benny had a show with Victor, the comedian, the piano player.
Victor Borgia?
Victor Borgia.
Yeah, Borgia.
Yeah. For Saccone, I think, which is Standard Oil, New York.
Mm-hmm.
And played the 400 Club. Well, the 400 Club business was bad, and he said that he couldn't guarantee the payroll for the last... So I left the band in December of 46.
Mm-hmm.
Came to California. Then I had to sweat out the Los Angeles musicians' union card. Another 6 months. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been out in California since then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask you why, do you have an idea why people stopped dancing?
Well, it was kind of a revolution between the generations there. The one generation, it's happening again too. At least this is the theory.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't want to, whatever your mother and father will listen to, they wanted no part of that. Revolted, no, you know, and that was what affected us.
Yeah.
Now, the rock stuff, the younger kids are starting to like the stuff that we did.
Uh-huh.
They're, you know, I don't know if it was ever going to amount to anything, but was 57,000 people planning to hear the Rolling Stones at the Qualcomm at $60 a ticket in the rain.
Yeah.
That's still pretty big business.
I guess so. So you moved out to the West Coast.
December of 46. Yeah.
You got into some broadcasting
Well, you know,
work?
you sweat out your
Oh, same thing again,
6
huh?
months card. At the end of that time, I did a radio show. The television hadn't started, you know. The 5-day-a-week radio show with Bob Crosby called a Club 15. It was a short program, but it was 5 days a week, and that went for 5.5 years. In the meantime, you do recordings too with different groups and different. And somewhere along the line, I bought an orchard in San Diego County, which I kept that orchard until I broke my back.
Was it, what did you grow there, oranges or?
Avocados.
Oh.
Yeah. Commercially, you know.
Yeah.
I don't recommend it. The area, 80-mile-an-hour winds are tough on avocados.
Oh, what caused you to want to get into something outside music?
My ex-wife,
Yes, okay.
she didn't like the music business at all.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
made nothing but enemies.
Uh-huh,
And she's too old to listen to this, so
Yeah.
she wouldn't know.
okay. Well, after your accident, you were still able to play. You were still able to play a trumpet. Yeah.
And I was lucky because Crosby, you know, I started with him at Disneyland, and I could get around quite a bit better then, but a lot of things have happened since that original accident.
Right.
That broke the left leg and
Yeah.
tore up both shoulders, and no use. And I had surgery on the lip. That was a pretty big blow right here,
Sure.
right there. But I still playing. I like to play.
There's some guys around
I
here.
can't do what I.
There's some guys around here who still like to play with you.
What?
There's some guys around here who still like to play with you.
Yeah.
Bobby
that's-
Gordon, for one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah?
I did New Year's Eve with Bobby.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
When you look back on your career in music, would you say that there's a few years that you really look fondly on because of the band you were in or just because of the success of the music at that time? What was your favorite years in the music career?
Well, that's tough. I would have to be. I think more recent than the original.
No kidding.
The three
Yeah.
thing. Because I've done, for about 10 years, my late wife and I put on a jazz things right at a place called Little Bavaria. And there, you know, we just took over the place and hired the musicians. Most of them were like Nick Fatul, Eddie Miller, and Abe Most, and Abe Lincoln, the trombone player, and Bobby Gordon, all good jazz players, and that went on for about once a month for about 10 years. And I think, as far as, of course, I was the leader.
Yeah.
You got to do what I
All right.
That, but I really, but working with Matty Matlock, who did a lot of recordings and used me on them, and those are the things that I'm glad I did, because I can listen to those. They're not like the big organized bands. That's just a recording date. You do that and you don't play that. But Matty was a wonderful writer and arranger, a good clarinet player, and also Billy May. Billy May was one of the, probably my best friend in the whole music business. Because when I first came to Hollywood, he gave me my first recording dates, and we did the Time Life series.
Right.
I remember when I was in Palmer Valley, that's where the orchard was. I wasn't playing very much, and Billy used to come down, and he said, "How's your lip?" or something like that. I said, "Well, when it wasn't too good," I said, I don't think I should have," because these dates are pretty hard.
Yeah.
And so a while that I didn't think I was. So he came down once, and I was doing an ice show in San Diego. "Would you really working on it?" So he said, "How's your lip?" I said, "Well, I just did the ice." He said, "Well, you want to do some recording?" I said, "Yeah." So that's what it was with the Time Life thing. And that thing went on for, well, there were 15 albums, copied. All these were copies of the original records.
Right.
You know, and I started on the third album, I think.
I wanted to ask you about one thing that I read in a book by Bill Crow. It has jazz stories in it, and it said something about you guys were at a Holiday Inn somewhere, and it had a sign, "Happy hour, all you can drink for $1." Do you remember this thing? Do you remember what you said? Or somebody?
Somebody said I said that.
Did you say that?
That wasn't me.
Okay. Somebody said, "Give me $2 worth," right? "All you can drink for $1, give me $2 worth."
I think Billy Butterfield is who said that.
Okay.
But Crosby, I think he blamed me on that.
Okay. Well, I always like to check on these stories, you know, because sometimes they don't come out exactly right when people print them.
But I will confess, it's not mine originally.
Okay.
I got blamed for it.
Uh-huh.
And I heard it was Billy.
Yeah. Well, you're certainly a popular man in the San Diego area, because all I've been hearing for the last couple days, you know, of people saying, "John Best might come here, and we got to see him." Yeah. And I know there's some folks waiting for you downstairs that I hope you have a good time seeing. And I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Well,
and reminiscing. And I think you've seen some great times in the music, and you certainly made a big contribution to this music over the years. Would you do it all over again?
I guess so.
Yeah.
If I could correct a few things.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to thank you again for coming today, and it's been a great pleasure for me. On behalf of Hamilton College, thanks a lot.